Distinguished delegates of digital nations, esteemed guests from international organizations, and invited speakers, hello and welcome. Thank you very much for joining our forum despite your busy schedule. I'm one of the leads at Digital Nations and also the MC of today's Global Forum, Deputy Director Chetera of the Ministry of Interior and Safety. Digital Nations is a club of leading digital governments. It was founded in 2014 by Korea, UK, Estonia, New Zealand, Israel, these 5 countries. And in 2022, currently, membership has expanded to include Canada, Uruguay, Portugal, Mexico, and Denmark, making it a group of 10 nations. As one of the founding nations of Digital Nations, the Republic of Korea hosted the ministerial meeting in Busan in 2016, and with the support of members, this year it took on the role of the chair once again. This year's meeting carries much significance, in particular because the international community has overcome the pandemic and is meeting face-to-face in 3 years. With that, let us officially begin the Global Forum. First, we would like to hear from Han Chang-seop, Vice Minister of Interior and Safety, for his opening remarks. We would like to invite the Vice Minister to the stage.
네, 안녕하십니까?
Distinguished guests, good afternoon. I'm the Vice Minister of Interior and Safety, Han Chang-seop. Honorable Mario Camper-Largo, Secretary of State for Digitalization and Administrative Modernization, Chief Executive Officer Tom Reed, Chief Information Officer Lucas Ilves, Executive Director Pascal Elvis, Treasury Board Secretary from the Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada, distinguished delegations of Digital Nations. And of course, Mr. Navid Hanif, Assistant Secretary General of the UNDESA, Global Director Arturo Gutierrez of the World Bank, Mr. Carlos Santiso, Head of Division at the OECD. Thank you very much for joining us today at this forum. And I would also like to thank our keynote speaker today, Chairman Ko Jin of the Presidential Committee on Digital Platform Government. As the chair of Digital Nations in 2022, the Republic of Korea has rolled out many active efforts this year. Starting with the Senior Officials Steering Committee yesterday, we kicked off the Digital Nations Ministerial Meeting, which is the most important responsibility of a chair of a given year. In 2016, we held the ministerial meeting in Busan, and it is a great honor to host yet another ministerial meeting. At the Global Forum hosted with the ministerial meeting, we have invited esteemed experts from the UN, OECD, and World Bank to discuss the role of digital nations in developing the international community in this age of digital transition. We will be discussing which role is to be played by us nations. And also, as case examples of the digital platform government put forth by the Korean government starting this year, we will look into the case of mobile driver's licenses and cooperation with civic hackers. We also hoped to discuss ways to facilitate sustainable digital innovation through digital capacity building in the public sector. Distinguished delegations, we have cooperated in user-based public services provision, ethical use of technologies, digital inclusion, open government, and sparking innovative culture through public-private partnership, and many more areas to uphold the 10 principles of the Digital Nations Charter. We have been cooperating very deeply thus far. I hope that today's discussions will help us bring our ties even closer strengthening our cooperation. And I would like to ask for your continued support so that we, Digital Nations members, can contribute even greatly to the development of digital governments and expand its role on the global platform. We look forward to your continued interest and attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister, for your words. Next, we'd like to invite Mario Campo Largo, Secretary of State from Portugal, for his congratulatory remarks. Please welcome him up on the stage.
Dear Chair, Vice Minister of Interior and Safety, Aung San Suu Kyi, dear colleagues, esteemed audience. For those I haven't met yet, I'm Mario Campo Largo, and I am the Secretary of State of Digitalization and Administrative Modernization in the Portuguese government, and I feel very honored to be with you today. Before doing this very short address, I'm sure that all the members of this audience that are not Korean will join me in expressing our solidarity and our condolences for the dramatic events that Korea suffered in the last few days. All our sympathy, all our solidarity, and I'm sure that I express the views of all the colleagues in this room by feeling the sorrow that Korean people is feeling today. But much beyond this sad moment, I would like to start by thanking Korea for hosting this event in this beautiful city of Seoul, and for giving digital nations, countries, and major international organizations the opportunity to meet in person after so many years of working digitally with each other. By meeting in person, we are able to go further in sharing views and knowledge and experiences, and in the end, to collaborate to realize the full potential of digital technologies for our countries and our people. It's certainly for me an honor to be here today sharing experiences and insights with others who believe that a better digital world leads to better economies, better governments, and a higher quality of life for our citizens, and a sustainable future for our world. I'm confident that this will be a very insightful and fruitful meeting, resulting even in a stronger collaboration amongst those that are present here. And I'm sure that we all feel impatient to all the presentations and the discussions that we'll have during this afternoon and tomorrow. We take also the opportunity to thank Korea for the great efforts during the presidency of this Digital Nations Group. We as Portugal and as the next chair, we are committed to take further the work, continue the reflection on the topics that have been highlighted before by Vice Minister, but also bring to this group all the dynamics that we can to ensure that by the end of our chairmanship, we could have such a successful meeting like this one here in Korea. And all our energy and knowledge and commitment will be put at the service of the Digital Nations Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, Secretary of State, for your congratulatory remarks. We will now hear from President of Digital Platform Government Committee, Ko Jin, his keynote speech. We would like to invite the President onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Ko Jin. I am the President of the Digital Platform Government Committee. First of all, I would like to mention two things. Since this is the National Mourning Week, I'm not going to be able to provide a very entertaining presentation. And another thing is I'm only given 10 minutes, so I won't be able to cover a lot of things either. I hope that next time, when we meet at this Digital Nations Forum or in your countries, if you give me another opportunity, I will give you a much more entertaining and insightful speech. And I'm also the president of Korea Metaverse Association, and I hear very interesting things. But I didn't really know that there was this Digital Nations Global Forum. I now think that it would be very interesting to have a metaverse version of the Digital Nations Global Forum. I'll try to make that possible at our association. So with that, I would like to walk you through the digital platform government strategies that the Yoon government is putting forth. This clicker seems to not work. I should move on to the next slide. So now it seems to work. I believe we should think about why, at this point, digital platform government is coming under the spotlight. Our people are already very familiar with private services that involve digital technologies, and they now enjoy their services, whatever it is, with one click. However, when it comes to public services, the quality is coming short of this high expectations. And also, with our experience regarding COVID-19, we cannot solve these problems or deliver a good solution with the efforts of the government alone. We have to depart from our existing way of doing things and take on an innovative perspective. That's why the government felt that it had to go through a transformation in line with these changes. And of course, it is not that the government didn't make any efforts in the past. Of course, the government has worked very hard in the computer PC era, internet era, and in the mobile era. It has been adopting IT actively, and Korea has already realized an e-government that is at the top-notch level across the world. However, with this siloed structure and bureaucratic framework, we ended up aggravating this silo structure, and this has hampered data sharing and cooperation. Therefore, we were not able to achieve full innovation or integrated services required by the general public. We can no longer solve solutions with our previous way of work. We now have to break through of that and look for a new solution. That's why the Yoon Suk-yeol government is putting forth this digital platform government slogan. It is to build a new government collaborative structure with citizens, businesses, and the government on top of the digital platform where all the data is connected. So it's a completely different way of providing services. The government will no longer provide a one-sided services. It will join hands with private companies and accompany them on the journey to innovation. Digital platform government is all about connection, openness, and cooperation. And under these three principles, we will lead the future of the Republic of Korea. Thus far, each ministry's systems and data will no longer be partitioned and siloed, but it will be integrated to create one platform on which we will truly cooperate. If you look at this diagram here, we will fuse and share data to create new value, and this value will be much greater than the combination of each data. And by adopting the cloud system, we will improve the timeliness and the effectiveness of data usage. And if you look here, it says X1, X2, X3, three separate systems. And this required great costs, whereas if we integrate them into one single platform, we will be able to switch to a subscription model and decrease costs that are entailed. So as you see on this diagram, we will increase the value and decrease the cost, creating synergy effects and bringing greater benefits. From now on, I would like to focus on our 4 key projects to realize the digital platform government. First of all, through public-private collaboration, we will build a platform, an innovative platform-based infrastructure. So from the integrated perspective, we will link our existing systems. We will connect them, and through this connection, we will facilitate data usage, data utilization, and also data sharing. And once this basic integration is completed, we will then design and implement new innovative infrastructure in line with our vision. In this process, within this infrastructure, there will be cloud, data lakes, and big databases, and we will adopt the latest private technologies so that we can provide services that the general public can be truly satisfied with. And secondly, we will promote full access and utilize high-quality data. And to this end, we will abolish any regulations that hamper our facilitation of open data. And we will also amend our practices in interpreting the existing law. And by expanding data utilization through pseudonymization, we will also facilitate wider data usage. And thirdly, we will transform the way that the government works by leveraging advanced technologies such as AI and big data. So rather than one ministry solving their problems on their own, we will encourage cooperation between the public and private sectors across ministries and central and local governments. So we will not rely on past practices, but on data so that we can make sure that a scientific-based decision-making process takes root. And also, we'll make sure that the public officials can seamlessly catch up with our way of data-based decision-making by encouraging digital capability building. And fourth, we will provide a safe and reliable user environment. So we will ensure transparency in the usage of personal information to prevent any leakage or abuse of personal information. We will make sure that our general public is reassured. And secondly, regarding any quantum cryptography communication technologies, we will adopt these latest technologies to create a reliable and safe data environment. A digital platform government is not just about bringing down the barriers between ministries and creating an integrated platform. This is a thing that the president has also highlighted. we have to create this platform that aggregates all of the data and all of the ministries, and this would become a test bed where we try out new technologies, new policies and strategies. And this would attract talented, promising startups. And through the opening of these strategies, we will make sure that the next generation promising unicorn companies are generated. And these innovative startups nurtured as a result would lead the development of our digital industry and make sure that Korea solidifies its status as a digital technology powerhouse. Once the digital platform government is achieved, people will no longer lag behind or have to repeatedly submit any documents or make their time and effort go to waste. The government will preemptively fulfill their needs by reaching out to our people. And companies will be able to use the quality data that the government disclosed to create new business opportunities, and also based on their existing experience, they'll be able to break into the global market even further. The government will deepen its partnership with the private sector and engage in transparent and scientific policy making and become a truly trustworthy government. So in order to successfully implement the digital platform government that is so important, we have already established a presidential committee on digital platform government directly reporting to the president. We will maximize private sector capabilities and also ideas by focusing on AI data, infrastructure, service innovation, and etc. We have already put together an expert panel, and we are engaging experts in private, public, and academia. And we also have an advisory panel that have extensive experience in e-government, and we'll be able to receive feedback based on their experiences. And we also have specialized institutions to complement on technological or business-related projects. And we also have very talented public officials dispatched by the government and private experts that we have specially hired. There is a task force comprised of these experts who will be in charge of the implementation. This committee will be in line with the vision and the future direction of the digital platform government, and we will, by the first quarter of next year, put together the detailed action plans. You might be wondering, when a new committee is launched, they first announce their directive or their initiative and then start implementation. That was the way we did things and the way how past practices went. However, we are going to flip this the other way around. So once the committee was made, the private experts that are parts of the committee, we thought that we should then come up with our tangible plans. So as of now, we do not have a system architecture or a detailed workflow about or detailed execution plans. We are developing that right now through our discussions. So we will be able to put forth a more detailed plan by the first quarter of next year. The clock that's right in front of me is not moving, it's not ticking, so I don't know how minutes far I'm in. And also, in order to build consensus about the presidential committee, we are going to run around 20 projects through which we are going to reach out into the government. We will make sure that we build more awareness among the general public, and not only that, we are going to identify what the toughest challenges are, what the greatest difficulties are in building a digital platform government. So the biggest problem with the system, we're trying to wrap our mind around what that is, really. And in order to ensure that the digital platform government is truly implemented, we will report every quarter to the National Affairs meeting, and the President has also ordered us to do so. The digital platform government will lay a stepping stone for new growth to ensure Korea to become the standard of global platform government and leap forward into a digital powerhouse. We will make sure that we set a new standard for the international community and become the backbone of the digital platform government in the world. And that this provides a cornerstone for the government to lead the future. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your keynote speech. It was a good opportunity to share the digital platform government roadmap with the members of the Digital Nation. Before we move on to the next session, we will take a group photo. I would like to invite our distinguished guest, Ms. Navid Hanif, Assistant Secretary General of the UN, and Mr. Carlos Santiso from OECD, and also Arturo Herrera Gutierrez from World Bank, and all of our VIPs and guests to the stage for the group photo.
모두 자리에 착석해 주시기 바랍니다.
Please take your seats.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We are going to start the special session. 그럼 지금부터 국제기구에서
Now I would like to invite digital government officers from international organizations for their presentations on the international community's expectations on the role of the digital nations and the digital government roadmap. We invite Assistant Secretary General Navid Hanif from UNDESA for his presentation. Please come up the stage.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. I think the Honorable Secretary of State has already conveyed our sympathy and our sentiments to the government of Korea on this sad incident. So, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, digital technologies are rapidly changing our lives and societies. The COVID-19 has made their pervasiveness in our lives vividly clear. They have the immense potential to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. But there are challenges and risks that need to be managed. And this will depend largely to the extent that we are willing to reassert human agency over technology. In his report, Our Common Agenda, the United Nations Secretary General emphasizes that the fourth industrial revolution has changed the world and that digitalization fosters collaboration, connection, and sustainable development. And above all is a global public good that should benefit everyone, everywhere. The Secretary General in May 2020 presented a roadmap covering 8 key areas. And these include global connectivity, digital public goods, digital inclusion, digital capacity building, digital human rights, artificial intelligence, digital trust and security, and global digital cooperation. He proposed specific actions to harness the potential of digital technologies for the larger good. And I would like to focus my remarks this afternoon just on 2 aspects of the roadmap, given the limited time I have. First and foremost is the fact global connectivity remains elusive. Despite investments in technology and the development gains achieved in many countries, the digital divides persist both within and among countries. This is limiting the potential reach and impact of digital technologies. This also raises issues of equity, inclusiveness, and solidarity. And these should be addressed upfront. But connecting the unconnected is not just about access to mobile, internet, and new technologies. As a first step, we need to identify barriers to digital inclusion relating to access, affordability, and above all, ability to embrace these technologies. Human skills matter. And the second step is to develop a targeted implementation, people-centered strategy for leaving no one behind that is grounded in data, design, and delivery optimization. Meaningful connectivity requires relevant content available in local languages and the skills and capability to transform information into actionable knowledge. We found these factors So relevant is the biennial e-government survey produced by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. It is one of the major publications of the UN, which is a globally known report on digital government, digital trends and analyses. And it has been recognized as a valuable measurement and development tool, serving both as monitoring mechanism and a policy framework for public sector digitalization. The e-government assesses the e-government development of UN member states according to a quantitative composite index called the United Nations E-Government Development Index. And I must mention here, the picture is not very promising. The latest count, we just saw a very small increase from 0.49 to 0.51 in EGDI overall improvement. 3.5 billion people living in 193 member states of the UN lag fairly behind on the EGDI, the development index. And this index is composed of three sub-indices: the online service index, the telecommunication infrastructure index, and the human capital index. The reason for three composite indices is anchored on the simple idea that digital government is not just a technological issue. Building portals are not enough. We need to make sure governments also invest in ICT infrastructure and people's skills. Now let me come to the second aspect of the roadmap, and that is about global digital cooperation. And these discussions usually take at the Internet Governance Forum. It is convened annually by the UN Secretary General. And it is a forum for multi-stakeholder dialogue on public policy issues related to the Internet governance, including the Internet's sustainability, robustness, security, stability, and development. And I just want to flag for you that the 17th meeting of the IGF will be held in Addis Ababa at the end of this month. We are focusing on 5 key areas that require global cooperation: connecting all people and safeguarding human rights, avoiding internet fragmentation, which we are witnessing taking speed, governing data, protecting privacy, enabling safety, security, and accountability, addressing advanced technologies, especially AI. And I hope the members of digital nations will actively participate in this forum and enrich its deliberations. There's a more important aspect of global cooperation where the UN Secretary General is advancing one notion, and that is, please look at the global digital space as a collective good, or I could call it global commons. He has proposed a global digital compact, which is expected to outline shared principles for an open, free, and secure digital future for all. The compact is expected to cover issues relating to digital connectivity, avoiding internet fragmentation, providing people with options as to how their data is used, application of human rights, and promoting a trustworthy internet by introducing accountability criteria for discrimination and misleading content. The Digital Compact will be agreed at the Summit of the Future in 2024, but it's available for consultation. And I encourage all members of digital nations to influence its shape and its eventual content. You can access it at the UN Tech Envoy's website, and we are looking forward to your contributions. Let me end by highlighting that the United Nations Charter, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the framework of universally recognized human rights are the foundations that should underpin the digital commons. And related aspects such as data, emerging technologies, the 2030 Agenda, and the commitment to leave no one behind also provide both impetus and guidance for this effort, including such principles as accessibility, inclusion, meaningful participation, benefits for all, and human agency, equality, and non-discrimination. These may come to you as high-sounding words, but these matter for the large chunk of humanity inhabiting this planet. I'm confident and fairly optimistic that the digital nations will advance these principles in their efforts to harness the potential of digital technology for the larger good. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General Naveed Hanif, for your kind words. You briefed us on the fact that we have to muster the wisdom of digital nations. And next, we'll hear from Mr. Carlos Antiso from OECD. Please step onto the stage.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the government of Korea to invite us at the OECD to be part of this important meeting. And again, let me join my predecessors and colleagues also in extending our real sympathy for the people of Korea for what is going through. So again, thank you for this space. Let me just take a few minutes to share with you some of our perspectives from the OECD around the important topic that you put on the table about why we need to have governments that are agile and proactive now, and what people are expecting from our governments more and more every day about how governments should respond using digital and data means. And I think what's happening in our places, what's happening in our times is really also a lot of things have been changing faster than we expected in terms of what people are expecting also from governments on what and how to deliver. And this Uruguayan writer is summing that up quite nicely in terms of when we thought that we had all the answers, all of a sudden all the questions changed, especially for our community in digital government, that we thought that we were going into the right direction. And I think the pandemic has thrown a lot of issues on the table in terms of expectations of people, in terms of what governments should deliver and how they should deliver it. So yes, we know all these stages of development of digital government or government over time, going from the analog government, where I think everything was on paper, but not only was everything was on paper, but really where government actions were really oriented towards satisfying bureaucracy's needs rather than servicing citizens. And how we move to electronic government in the 90s were around automatizing processes that were thought through as paper-based. And in the last 10, 15 years, we move into digital government that you know very well and that you have taken forward in your governments in terms of integrating services and looking more at front office services and how governments really should serve citizens better using digital means. And now when we move, I think now the new phase of what we would call agile government, which is more not only about thinking of the integration of services, but having governments that are also much more geared towards servicing citizens using digital and data tools. And I think here, what we at the OECD think is that digital transformation is not becoming an issue about digitalization, but it's really an issue about transforming government using data and digital tools. And I think that's where this agility now that citizens are expecting from governments is a stage of development of those. At the OECD, we have developed a couple of years ago, in 2014, a framework to think about digital government around three principles, or let's say three high-level principles around openness and engagement, governance and the governance of digital government and the coordination functions and the capacity to deliver on those. And these three big principles and 12, let's say, principles are defining digital government in the way we see it. But a couple of years back, we went through, again, this framework to develop a little bit more about what are the underlying principles that should guide digital government. And there are 6 principles here that I wanted to share with you that are quite important, because really when we look at digital, or let's say digital government nowadays, it's really not so much about tech solutions or digitalization of processes. It's really how governments are getting smarter, or should get smarter at using data and digital tools to transform government that is digital by design, and not only adding after the fact, but that it's also data driven, that is acting as a platform, open by default, and user driven and proactive. And I think these 6 principles are quite useful on how we think agile government beyond digital government, in the sense of the ability that governments have to leverage what technologies can bring to develop better ways of doing things, not necessarily the same way. And at the OECD, we developed this framework around 2 indexes that you know very well as well. And I think with our colleagues with DESA and the World Bank also are complementing those, because these indexes are 2 in particular. One is about digital government, and the other one is about open government. And here, the last version of the index are 2019, and they're going to be updated this year, next year actually, in fact. And the survey work is going to start soon. And again, I invite you, every one of you, to be really a big part of this survey and data collection exercise, because it's going to tell us a little bit more what Navid was saying about how far the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation or not, because the UN data is showing that actually maybe not as much as we thought. And here we want to measure how far governments have become smarter at using data and digital tools to provide agile services. And this index is of 2019, for example. You see them here, that are going to be available and updated next year. Another thinking about how, for example, in the second one around open data, how much government data is actually available and accessible, but how far it is used by governments in redesigning or rethinking the way they operate and deliver services. And I'll come back to that, because actually, for example, issues around use of data is probably one of the dimensions that was weaker in the previous index. But there again, what these indices are trying to really telling us is about how far, how smarter governments are getting at using the tools that now digital technology is providing to become more agile. And that's the theme of this year discussion. We developed a number of complementary tools to get these things into practices, in terms of frameworks, for example, around the governance of digital government, which is still an issue in terms of how government are organizing digital government, not only as a sort of technical back office function, but as a critical functions of centers of government, so that from the center you really help all actors and all ministries at all levels of governments to use and to lever digital transformation. One of the challenges we see, for example, is how central governments can help municipalities leapfrog digital transformation, because a lot of our challenges is really around frontline services that municipalities are providing. Another framework that is quite useful is in terms of how you govern data in the public sector and leverage that. I think that's an issue that has changed with the pandemic in terms of, let's say, the public perception about government use of data, that maybe before the pandemic was more like everything goes and everything was open. to the public in that sense. And I think now there's much more questions about privacy and security of data and much more resistance to have people share their data. One of the issues that we work a lot at the OECD is about data sharing between public and private sector, between citizens and governments, between citizens and the private sector. But the governance of data is also changing. And I think one of the things that also at the OECD we try to contribute to the global debate about the governance of digital transformation is around the standards that can be developed, standards that can be aspirational in many cases, but that are also providing a guiding north for a lot of countries to develop their issues. We just issued one around precisely the issues around data sharing between public and private sectors, which is a critical issue, as you know, in many sectors that needs to go through. Or we also adopted a standard around the ethics of data and how you make sure that you have an ethical use of data in the public sector. So the OECD, through its standards and good practices, is contributing to those issues. Let me just, also for the matter of time, just mention three things that we're working on and that digital nations have been really also a big inspiration in some of the issues that we tackle. The first one that is work that is ongoing right now by the working group on digital government that Tom is chairing and that is doing a fantastic job at the OECD, is really looking and working around the global standard, OECD standard, on the governance of digital identity, which is a core enabler for all the other functions of digital government and one of the most sensitive, let's say, issues. There's a lot of debates about digital identity and how it can be governed in terms of the balance between public and private, let's say, public regulations and private sector delivery of digital identity and authentication systems. But this is one area of work where digital nations has been also quite important in nurturing that reflection, and also the World Bank's work on identity for development has been also quite, there are 10 principles, for example, of identity for development that have been also quite useful. And here we try to take these recommendations for next year, mid-year, for our council. Another issue that we're working on is really around how you rethink the design and delivery of public services in the digital area. And this is not only about government digital services or how you provide public services online, but it's really how you rethink the design of public services online and offline in a digital environment. And that brings issues around inclusion, access to public services that are not necessarily always online. They need to be multi-channel, as you know. But there's a lot of back office modernization that can be achieved in that context. And the third area that also we're working on, and we are open also to discuss how we can collaborate on that, is around digital investments. There's a big concern in a lot of countries in the OECD in particular, but also beyond, about the increase of public expenditure going to government technologies. I think, for example, Gartner is estimating that government technology spending in the world is going to increase to $600 billion next year. And there's an issue around the efficiency of public spending or those public investments in digital solutions. And what we try to work in the OECD is a framework that helps think or work through the public investment process of digital investments projects. And I think that's very important, especially when you talk to your colleagues, ministers of finance, about how efficient public spending in digital solution is, especially in governments, when we have a lot of histories of a lot of failures and all cost overruns in a lot of these programs. So there's a concern around the efficiency of that spending. And we see that, for example, in Europe, where a lot of the recovery funds, at least 20% of them, are going to be invested in digital solutions, and in particular in public administration. So these are three areas of work that at the OECD we have on our agenda right now that we're working on, and that the collaboration with digital nations has been particularly useful in taking that forward. So going back to the subject of the discussion about why governments need to be agile and proactive, and actually, especially in the pandemic, we've seen that people actually have changed expectations in terms of the abilities of governments to react and to respond with agility to unprecedented situations, so that they can anticipate their needs without having to be asked about them. And the issue of agility, agile governments and agile government, which are two sides of the same coin in terms of regulatory agility and administrative simplification on one hand, and the other one, the agility of public service design and delivery using digital means are quite important. Two areas that I would like to underscore that actually in our index in 2019 were a little bit maybe on the weaker side in terms of the agility of governments. One was really around government as a platform, and the other one is about government proactiveness. And government proactiveness in particular was an important factor that was quite weaker in OECD countries compared to the other dimensions that I mentioned before around digital government, these 6 dimensions. So why working as a platform is important, and I think there are 3 main reasons here that we underscore a lot of at the OECD, is that the ability to have interoperability within government is also allowing to governments to be more centered on the users' needs and to have an integrated response and understanding of what those users' needs are. And there also be an important dimension in terms of being consistent, reliable and fair in the way they design and deliver services, because there's also an expectation of fairness that is quite important in terms of having access to public services, depending and irrespective actually of your situation, including your localization in the country. And the issue of seamlessness and proactivity, that a lot of governments are trying to redesign services so that people automatically receive notices of what they need to do. And there again, I think for all of us, it's not only a technical problem, I think, that we're facing in all our governments. It's also a cultural change in terms of what, it's bringing back the public into public services in terms of how bureaucracies really think and operate in the way of servicing citizens in that sense. And the cultural shifts that are required within public services are quite important in that sense. So the digital tools really help public servants first to have tools so that they can meet users' needs in terms of their tools at their disposals. And we see, for example, a lot of debate around artificial intelligence, but the automation of routinary tasks in public administrations are going to free up a lot of time for people in the civil service, in the public services, to serve citizens in the front line. But it's also important to empower and to involve the public in the design of those services. And part of that issue, and one of the challenges we have, is really around the governance of data, and treat data with respect in that sense, in terms of the models of governance of data that are required in terms of ensuring security, integrity, and privacy of personal data, but also allowing public and private data sharing. And our colleague before from the government platform also mentioned this idea of how through data commons and other types of platforms one can facilitate the sharing of data that has a public purpose, or at least a common interest. And the issue of proactiveness as well, that was one of the dimensions that was weaker in the OECD countries in terms of the abilities of governments to anticipate people's need and respond to them rapidly. One of the challenge we've seen, and you've all faced, is really around our rethinking government around people's lives events. A lot of governments, the last one being the United States at the end of last year, have launched a number of initiatives to reorganize public services around, let's say, a birth, getting a house mortgage, and this type of public services that are that are critical around our lifespan. And that has not been so easy for those countries that have tried to do it, but it's still a lot of expectations from citizens to make them, in terms of the agility of government to respond to their needs, is really organize themselves around their life and not the other way around. And that needs, two things. One is like to get people engaged, not only in terms of getting the services, but also getting, helping governments to identify the problems that they're facing a little bit more actively, and also using data to identify those needs, especially of vulnerable groups. And I think that's an issue also around that we see as a as a challenge is the increasing what we call the data poor. People who are not generating data will not be captured by automatic systems of artificial intelligence using data. So there's an issue around the inclusion of those people who are not necessarily data generators in that sense, to be included in those services that will be designed based on data. And the other thing is also how to use and leverage common resources so that governments actually becomes invisible to citizens, which is, we're far off from that. We're very far off yet, but the idea is really that the governments provide services without really being asked to in that sense. And I think there getting the public infrastructure right is very important, in particular these underlying systems of identity and payment systems and data sharing systems are quite important to this agility that is expected. I think one of the dimensions that we also quite looked at, and our friend from the digital platform of government has also underscored, is how you facilitate and encourage public-private partnerships around digital government innovations. One of them being GovTech, in terms of these startups that are starting to work with governments, especially local governments, to improve the design and quality of services, of municipal services. And GovTech collaboratives are quite interesting phenomenon in a lot of OECD countries, especially at the local level, around public-private partnerships between, on the one hand, startups that want to have a social impact, and on the other hand, bureaucracies that want to innovate in the way that they think and design services. And we call them like GovTech, but they can be civic techs and other types of tech companies and startups and scale-ups that also help governments integrate innovation in the way they work. Because of procurement challenges, governments are not always very agile in incorporating new technical solutions in the way they work, and working with GovTech in the private sector, or startup in the private sector, can be a useful tool to, for example, experiment new solutions in regulatory sandboxes without going through the local the public procurement headaches that we all face in many countries. And this is also helping local entrepreneurship, in particular of the innovation ecosystems. And this is basically a little bit how we see somehow this interaction between governments and startups that is mediated through a public procurement to purchase innovation, but also that it is also nurtured by open data, because a lot of these startups are using open government data to create new solutions, including market solutions. And there's it's an important, interesting field that a lot of countries like the UK and Portugal have been trying and are trying. Let me just move a little bit around public collaboration because of the time, but I don't know how this clock is working. Anyway, so areas of public collaboration that we see in particular here, and the importance of that is really how we can help, especially from the advanced countries such as yourself in the digital nations, also help others to leapfrog digital development. And in particular, using and sharing digital public goods is a very important way forward, in which as we develop in our governments open source solutions for different types of services, that will be also helpful for others to not having to develop the solutions, but really tailor and adapt them to their environment. And also the collaboration is also important in terms of sustaining digital transformation at the global level. One of the issues that we see as a challenge also is how we bring into some of these global debates a more inclusive dialogue in terms of standard setting, but in terms of a number of discussions that are going on in which the transformation of digital government is occurring. One of the big issues and one of the big challenge we see is this debate around the debate around digital rights. One of the concerns that there is, increasing concern that there is in OECD countries is really around how rights are going to evolve in the digital age, but also the implications that digitalization has more broadly for democracy. I think that's a broader debate, but it's something that we need to take into account in terms of our global spaces for dialogue, in terms of the opportunities, but also the risk that digitalization poses to democracy and democratic processes. And let me just mention 3 areas where we see a lot of maybe potential for collaboration and synergies with the digital nations in particular, but also more broadly. One is these issues of GovTech collaboratives, but basically the spaces of collaboration between public and private sector to accelerate innovation, and especially experimentation in government technology solutions. What we call GovTech collaboratives in particular are quite an effective way to do it. And another one that I wanted to just mention briefly as well as I close is the issue of artificial intelligence. And I think one of the issues we see is that a lot of the debate around artificial intelligence is really focused around artificial intelligence for the digital economy and the role of governments in regulating it. And I think maybe there's less attention being paid to artificial intelligence, the use of the responsible, ethical, and strategic use of artificial intelligence in government agencies. And some of the issues that are happening in some countries also raise some concerns around whether we need a little bit more, let's say, regulatory standards to guide artificial intelligence in the public sector. And you might recall a couple of years ago the scandal in the Netherlands around the use of algorithms in social security benefits. But more recently, you have a number of audit agencies or code of accounts that are starting to take an interest about auditing governments in the way they use algorithms in the public sector. And again, in the Netherlands, for example, the Tribunal of Accounts has audited 9 algorithms of the government that were used in the police, in the Interior Ministry, in immigration, and found that 6 out of the 9 that they audited did not meet government requirement and were exposing government to risk in terms of including liability issues. So there's an issue around really thinking about, and I think other governments, like for example Canada has issued, or the UK, the algorithm standards, the standards for algorithm transparency in the public sector that the government of the UK has issued. Canada is also looking at ex-ante algorithm risk assessments in the public sector. But there's an issue here around also thinking about artificial intelligence in government agencies. And just also to conclude, and I think I have to conclude but I don't know we have an issue with the time here. But another issue that I think there's a lot of potential also is also investing in digital public goods, and also governments such as Estonia and others have done wonderful things on how you can share your open source solutions to other countries that are developing those. And we see that in dramatic cases such as Ukraine, where the digital services platform has been built on digital public goods. And now I think Ukraine now will share with Estonia its solutions to see what Lucas can do with it. But I think it's really an example on how some of these solutions can be used for the common good. And I think from the OECD standpoint, that's something that we're quite keen to see how we can support. So again, to sum up a little bit some of the issues that we raise here that will be also of interest to the Digital Nations Group in terms of agendas, and 3 areas that are on our agenda this year and next year that will be areas of synergies around digital identity and its governance in particular, and that is quite advanced. And digital services, or let's say the design and delivery of public services in the digital, let's say, context, is another area where we're working on, and that will probably have a mandate to go for a standard next year. And digital government investments is another area where we think there's more work to be done in terms of value for money and return on investment of digital government solutions, especially in areas, in countries that are now going to go through a crisis mode in terms of budget constraints and others. And areas of collaboration that I was mentioning that with the Digital Nations working groups in particular are quite useful. There's one that was mentioning around artificial intelligence, and the working group with artificial intelligence in Digital Nations is doing tremendous work around that. But also having thinking about public-private sector partnerships, especially between governments, local governments, and startups and scale-ups through what we call GovTech collaboratives, and digital public goods. This is also another area where we think there could be synergies, especially if we can find a way to structure those sharing of open source data, digital government solutions in a structured manner between countries. So with that, I thank you and extend my Gasamida to our host of Korea. Gasamida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlos Santiso, for your presentation. Next, from World Bank, we'd like to invite Director Arturo Herrera Gutierrez for his presentation on the World Bank activities. We'd like to invite him up on the stage.
Let me just double check that my presentation is there. Yes. Okay. So first of all, let me express on behalf of the World Bank our condolences and our solidarity with the people and the government of Korea on the tragic events of the last few days. Second, since this is a digital conference, but apparently the digital clock is making funny things, I'm going to time myself on a mechanic watch. Hopefully that does not make me you kick me out of the conference. It was really good to share the panel with Navid, which I have been bumping on over the last few years in the G20 meetings, and with Carlos, which I have even bumped in the public transportation bus in Washington. And so there are a lot of similarities on our presentations, but there are a few things that are different. And it's not surprising because this is an area which is evolving very fast. And as such, there are a few concepts in which at the World Bank, we have a slightly different definition, particularly on what we understand as GovTech and civic tech. So let me jump to my presentation. Since many of these issues were already addressed both by Navi and Carlos, I'm probably going to focus on what is our definition, our own approach to GovTech. Then how we organize our work around this to the GovTech Global Partnership, and particularly what are the results of the GovTech Maturity Index that we have been prepared at the bank, and the latest information on that is going to be released in 2 weeks. So let me start with a very similar graph like those, and I want to track a little bit what has been the development of the digital transformation in the public sector. In the 1990s was really about trying to automatize some of the back of processes of the government. And it was basically working on the treasuries of the government and trying to make sure that, for example, the payments were done in an automatic way. Then when we moved to the e-government, basically what the governments were doing was basically taking the paper-based processes and try to digitalize them. A big push was done in the 2000s when the digital government approach was adopted, and people start talking about the government as a platform, start having a data-driven approach to public sector issues, and start defining the public service already in a digital way. Now, the way we read these things at the World Bank is that in 2015, since 2015, we basically have a new approach, an approach that we call GovTech, and in this way it's a slightly different definition than the one used at the OECD, in a sense that there are three things that are different from what has been done before. The first one is that there's a whole of government approach to digital transformation. As opposed to be having each ministry doing the digital processes and advances by themselves, now there's an approach in which the government as a whole is trying to coordinate and making sure that they have the right way to manage the data and actually to provide, and also to provide services to the citizens. The second one is that there's a citizen-centric public service that, with a particular emphasis on that these services are universally accessible. Very important in this characteristic is to recognize that not all the citizens and not all the countries have access to solutions. So although in previous phases, probably the government focused on having online solutions, here we recognize that not everybody has access to laptops, but probably many people have access to mobile phones. So it's in this phase, in the GovTech phase, when the mobile government gets into. And the second one is and the last one is to try a system that is more simple, efficient, and transparent. Now, this graph will give you an idea how these kind of projects have been evolving at the World Bank. If we go back to 1995, we had around 42 projects at the World Bank, in which was, now we could call GovTech projects. This graph has the cumulative numbers of them, and we moved from 42 projects to 252 projects in 2000 to 745 projects in 2010, and almost 1,292 projects as we speak. Of these, most of them have already been closed. We have 314 projects that are active, and we have commitments close to cumulative commitments of $140 billion associated with these projects. Now, what is this GovTech approach? And as I said before, there are three characteristics that make it different than previous phases. One is the whole of government approach. Second, the universally accessible citizen-centric service, where we also have in mind that there may be a need to develop solutions for low-tech countries or low-tech environments, and simple and efficient government systems. Now, the way we organize this is through four different pillars. One, I'm going to start in the right part, is the core of government systems, and this is basically the back office of each government, the IFMIS, the public investment management systems, the human resources management system, payroll, etc. Then the second one is the public service delivery part, which is this idea that the solution needs to be customized for the specific characteristics of each government. And the third one, it's very important, is the citizen engagement phase. And at this phase, we recognize this is a bi-directional solution in which the governments move from being only providers of services to the government to interact to the citizens, to interact with the citizens. And the last one is what we call GovTech enablers, and that's looking at what are the fundamentals that prepare the development of a GovTech solutions, and that includes the skills in a country, the setups, but also, for example, the legal systems. And when I was working on this presentation, I'm not going to tell you when, because that will date me, but many years ago when I was a treasurer of Mexico City, we were processing probably close to 200,000 payments per year. And that's Mexico City is a government with 300,000 workers. And as you may imagine, that requires a lot of very intensive use of data services. But at that time, digital process were not authorized. So people will fill things in a database, then they will have to print it out and sign it, and what was being the official order to process a payment was actual physical paper, which then somebody else needs to capture it in a different database. And there were several problems that way of functioning was illustrated. Once it was not a whole government approach. There were separate databases on each of them, but also very important, the legal system was not set up in a way in which recognized digital processes. So just to give you an idea of what are the examples of current GovTech projects that we have, and this is, and we wanted to do this because these are not projects that we are replicating from which region to another. They have different kind of things. For example, in Brazil, what we're working is in a project to scale up the digital procurement applications of their procurement system. In Nigeria, it's about introducing that universal digital identification. One project which is very interesting in Jordan, and I'm going to devote a couple of minutes to it, it's about the whole implication of developing of providing the government services through a digital way. I'm probably going to move to that, but also how this actually creates employment opportunities. And given that the ambassador from Mexico is here, I'll probably use that as an excuse to give some numbers about it. Over the last decade or so, the Mexican economy has been growing at 2% per year, but the digital economy is growing at 5% per year. So that means that there are more jobs opportunities being created in the digital work than they are created in the traditional economy. And this is something that we are trying to capture in the Jordan project. Yes, there will be services from the government, but also we recognize that what working in the overall digital environment, there are access and new opportunities on the job, and particularly for the younger generations. Now, this is a big task, and we recognize that countries are at different stages. There are countries that are very much at the high end of any kind of GovTech approach. Korea is one of them. Denmark is another one. Singapore is another one. But then on sub-Saharan regions, they lack a lot. And so we thought that it was required that everyone who is interested in these issues should partner around it. So you will have the development partners where we are there along with some other partners here. But then it was very important to have some of the leading GovTech countries involved in this partnership. So the Ministry of Economy of Austria is working with us on this. The Swiss cooperation is working on those. The Germans are working on those. But very interesting, the governor of Korea is working with us through two different ministries. So that gives you an idea of their commitment. Is working with us through the Ministry of the Interior and Security, but also through the Ministry of Economics and Finance. Something that was mentioned in passing before, and particularly in the presentation of Janko, is that now it's really important to incorporate the private sector technologies to provide the right solutions. And let me give you an example, and that may sound obvious, but it's probably not in the nature of the governments, which tend to first think what will be the solutions that they will provide to themselves. There's a country in Europe, I'm not going to say the name, in which we were working a few years ago to try to modernize the way in which the government was working and actually to create a data center. So the project was extremely successful. Then the digital processes were growing so fast that after a couple of years, the data center was not sufficient. So there was a second phase of a project with the World Bank to create an even bigger data center. Now, the same story happened, and after the third phase, they decided to go to a cloud and actually partner with the private sector rather than keep building data centers all around their country. Now, so we have also our index. So we heard that the OECD have an index and the UN have their index. Our index is slightly different than those. The UN, if I understand it correctly, is a little bit more centered on online services from the government. What we wanted to do here was actually try to track how progress is done in each of the 180 economies that we work, and we divided that in 4 different categories. One is the category of core government systems, which is basically the back end of the government systems, treasury, payments, tax, payroll, etc. The second one is a public service delivery index, which is about the accessibility that citizens have. Then the citizen engagement index, which basically is measured with questions about the openness. And the third one, and the last one, is about the GovTech enablers, which include the legal framework, as I mentioned before. So we run this index in 2020. I think we released the numbers last year. A very important thing to note is that these are the results of what the countries themselves have reported. These are not numbers prepared by the bank, and there are 4 categories. Those countries which are mostly advanced economies and some of the high middle income countries that are in Group A, which are the leaders on GovTech issues. And then on the other hand, you have on Group D, the countries that have a minimal focus on GovTech issues. And let me show you the map of where are these countries. And the map basically speaks for itself. There are 2 regions, America and Europe, which basically have no single country in Group D. And then there are many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa which are on the red zone. And if you look to East Asia, you will see one country in Group A and 1 country in Group D. Those are South Korea and North Korea, respectively. Now, we have already run the numbers for 2022, and we are going to release the numbers in 2 weeks. So I'm not supposed to say anything about them, but since I'm the boss of the team who's preparing, I'm allowed to share some of this. So let me tell you what was one of our concerns. One of our main concerns is that, like in many aspects of the economy, we see a polarization, we see a divide, we see inequalities, and the 2022 numbers show 2 things. One, countries had advanced, but the digital divide is wider. So those countries, rich economies, are moving faster than the poor economies. So rather than being a catch-up, things are getting worse over the last couple of years. So what we think it is required for having an agile and active digital governance. The first one, and I haven't work in the government, going back to the World Bank, going back to the government, and now go back to the World Bank, I'll pretty much share the first one. There needs to be a high-level commitment and allocation of resources of the sustainability of reforms. We just saw an example with a presentation this afternoon of how the approach of the Korean government is done to a presidential commission at the highest level. Then there has to be interconnectivity and interoperability, and that's extremely important. Again, I'm going to give you a typical example of what's happening in a developing country. If you go to a local government, for each house, you will have a database for tax properties to pay property tax. The same house will be in another database for the public registry, and the same house will be in another database, usually under the urban secretariats, for land users. So rather than having one database for the same house, which is in exactly the same place and with the same measures, the government runs 3 different teams with 3 different databases, and very often with completely different information among of them. Something that I don't have. So my clock is running faster than when Carlos was here. So I don't know. Carlos is nicer than me, so I need to move faster than him. So I'm going to jump to the 5th point, and this issue of the digital skill development, both outside but also in the government. And governments are finding that they are actually competing for the same kind of skills with the private sector. So there's an issue about how to recruit and how to maintain staff in the government. So when we talk with the government of Singapore, I have a meeting very interesting with the Vice Minister of the government of Singapore and his top team. So the minister is very seasoned, the Vice Minister is very seasoned. His top team were all basically people in their 20s and under 30s. So who could afford to go and take a job that they were passionate about it and didn't care much at that stage of their lives about the payment. So there has to be a strategy about it. The final issue is all these things have been evolving over the last few years, but over the last couple of years, governments and their citizens are being facing different kind of juncture. We are still having the impacts. All of you are still using a mask. And then on top of COVID, we have the effects of inflation, the need to address the issues of climate change, and the impacts that war are having on prices, particularly on commodity prices, on trade, and food availability. That will require the governments to be smarter and more agile to be able to deliver more with less resources. And within that, there are 6 areas in which governments on the digital aspects need to improve. Service upgrade, tech savvy, and civic tech. On those issues, we have already an approach written and a publication at the World Bank, but we are working in the issue of interoperability and GovTech. And I'm going to conclude just sharing a few remarks about greening GovTech. And for me, this was kind of interesting because I always thought that GovTech definition was green. If you move from an environment which is paper-based to someone which is digital-based, in theory, that's environmental friendly. But the GovTech becomes bigger and bigger, managing databases, etc., have an impact on the environment, and we need to start being aware about it. My clock is run out of time. Thank you a lot.
That was Mr. Arturo Herrera Gutierrez of World Bank, Director for Governance Global Practice. Thank you very much for your presentation. And agile and active digital governance, your last statement on active and agile digital governance and your key message was particularly impressive. Thank you.
So with that, we would like to begin the panel discussion. As for the first panel discussion, the theme is the role of digital nations in the international community. We would like to invite our guests from international organizations and digital nations to discuss the role that should be played by digital nations. As a moderator, we have Director of Digital Government Cooperation, Son Sung-ju, and we would like to invite Chief Executive Officer Tom Reed from the UK GDS, Deputy Secretary General Lucas Ilves from Estonia, and Mr. Navid Hanif, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development at UNDESA, Mr. Carlos Santiso, Head of Division at OECD, and once again, Director Arturo Herrera Gutierrez from the World Bank. So our moderator and panelists, please step onto the stage.
네, 안녕하십니까. 오늘
Yes, hello. Allow me to introduce myself. I'll be moderating the panel discussion. My name is Son Sung-ju. I'm the Director of Digital Government Cooperation at the Ministry of Interior and Safety.
먼저 오늘 패널 토에 참석해 주신
So, first of all, I would like to thank our distinguished guests for being our panelists today.
오늘 첫 번째 패널 토에서는
And in the first panel discussion, we are going to talk about digital nations, member countries, and the role that should be played by these countries in the international community.
국제사회 속에서 지금
In the international community, the role of digital nations is becoming more and more important and prominent, just like our three speakers have demonstrated, because the digital divide is widening. In order to narrow down the divide and to aim for a collective growth, we're going to discuss what role should be played by us members.
먼저 저희가 국제기구에서
So first of all, we would like to throw a question to our speakers from international organizations.
저희가 드릴 질문은
The questions are, in developing countries and underdeveloped countries, there are a lot of them,
여러 가지 문제들이 존재하고 있습니다.
and there are many challenges.
그렇다면 국제사회의 디지털 정보의 전반적인 발전을 위해서
For the overall development of digital government in international community,
어떤 문제들을 가장 시급하게 해결될지
what challenges should be most urgently addressed? We would like to hear your thoughts on that.
먼저 유엔의 사무처장분께
So let's start with Mr. Navid Hanif from UNDESA.
Thank you so much. Let me frame the issues at three levels. First, what we have gathered from our survey. There is willingness to learn, but you need to change their mindsets within the government in these countries. That should be a starting point for helping these countries to embrace this way of running the government. But it is more like focus on service delivery. Second challenge, although I mentioned it's not an issue of technology, but our survey indicates it's access to hardware, access to technology, and its affordability. Developing portals, infrastructure, and ensuring that they have the human resources who can use the technology. Skills are missing, knowledge is not there, but they are keen to learn. And that's where we find members of digital nations can help these countries, both with portals and infrastructure and skills. Third level is making these apps and knowledge available through open sources. They don't need to reinvent. You have done so much work. You are leading the pack on this frontier, and if you make these apps available on open source, those countries can benefit and leapfrog from this stage. And my last point is, again coming from our survey, that the challenge that they are confronted with is the pace of change is very fast. What just Arturo mentioned, they just cannot find enough people who can join the government and stay attuned with the speed with which change is coming. And that will remain a global issue, because if we do not address it effectively and collectively, the divide will widen. And that's not good for the world's development. Thank you so much.
네, 사무총장님 말씀 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Navid Hanif, for your statement. So, on digital divide, as you have been seeing the problem of digital divide in the international community, so you have shared your experience with us directly. Thank you. Next, the person whose timer was running quickest, from the World Bank, Mr. Arturo Herrera Gutierrez, your answer, please.
Thank you. Thank you. And let me actually pick it up where Navid left it, and start with the issues related to inequality. And if we look to different measures of inequality or even poverty, if we look to in pure economic terms, the world has made huge improvements over the last 3 decades until COVID hit. COVID has several implications, some very painful, obviously, but when it comes to digital issues, have 2 different effects on different directions. On the one hand, it moves advances on the digital economy much faster than in the past. So at the World Bank, we basically learned to work remotely for 2.5 years. People engage in activities that basically change the way in which they consume services. They stop going to the movie theaters, and then they move to download films on Netflix or on Prime, Amazon. They order food online, etc. On the other hand, it actually widened polarity and increased. There were 80 million of people who moved to extreme poverty during COVID. So it's not surprising that the digital divide was widening. So the question is what we could do about it. And as you saw in the map that I presented before, there are huge differences in sub-Saharan Africa and some of Asia countries and in others. So one important thing is to learn from each other. And these meetings, these kind of meetings, specifically these meetings, are very relevant on those ways. That's part of the way in which knowledge is moving from one country to another. And we learn to do these kind of meetings digitally, but there's a difference in doing it face-to-face. Half of what we learn is what happened right now. Then during lunch, during dinner, we strike conversations, and that's the other half that we learn about how to do things. Then there are a couple of more issues that probably I want to focus. Citizens have been changed over the last their behavior over the last 12 or 13 years. They are not only now recipients of services, they want to have a much more active participation. And the digital world has allowed them to express their frustration in a faster way. So governments need to respond to that, but I also recognize that this is a two-way avenue. It's about providing them services, but also receiving feedback and information from them. And finally, the last issue that I would like to mention is that it has been recognized for a long time, but now it's even more important that it's not sufficient to digitalize the way that the government operates. Even at the smallest towns, municipality, it needs to be linked to services. So we have examples of small municipalities in which, yes, the government digitalized the way they operate, but for example, they provide in a digital way birth certificates, etc. So citizens need to be able to perceive in a tangible way that there are some service direct benefits that they will get from these kind of efforts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gutierrez, for your statement. As you mentioned, COVID has accelerated digital transformation, but at the same time, it has widened the digital divide. And so there is a sense of urgency in addressing this issue as a result. And as you mentioned, and in fact, the World Bank has been carrying out many projects to assist the developing countries on site. So thank you very much for sharing your insight with us. Moving on, we'd like to ask Mr. Carlos Santiso from OECD.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks. I was thinking what my colleagues have said before, and just like to add something that is intelligent and smart will be difficult, but I will want to pick up on these issues of digital divide and also, you know, the thing of, you know, some of the paradox that the digital transformation is representing. And I was thinking about this issue of what we call global, because it's both a global issue and it's a local issue. And I think when we talk about digital divides, this is not only between countries, but it's also within countries. In terms of different generations have access to different services and different habits in terms of accessing. So one of the things is that, you know, a lot of issues that we have to tackle with are very local because they really relate to the, you know, the ways governments have to service citizens at the local level. And one of the key challenges that are faced by many countries developed or in development, it's around municipalities, especially the local level, that are responsible for the delivery of a lot of services that people care most about, you know, for getting a birth certificate, for example, or getting a license for operating or a license. But anyway, a lot of these services are local and a lot of municipalities are very weak, and the digital transformation of municipal governments is a challenge that most countries face. Even we were, for example, discussing with the government of France that has now adopted an inclusive digital transformation strategy so that you don't leave no one behind because of their age or because in their localities in which they work. And this is really related about trust. Because what the pandemic has changed is not only the availability of services, as our friends from the UN have shown, but actually the demand or the use of those services by people. And you might remember 5 years ago we were discussing that some of the challenge of digital transformation in government is that actually no one was using the services that you were putting online. And I think that has changed, but that has also changed expectations. So if those services are not working, you know, that also breaks the expectation. And we just had an interesting survey at the OECD around what is one of the drivers of trust in government. And actually the capacity and responsiveness of government services was one of the drivers. But on the other side, if it doesn't work, that poses also a problem. I think the other issue also that is maybe more global in nature is the issue of that I wanted to, you know, maybe underscore. This is the balance between regulation and innovation at the global level, and how digital, you know, how you regulate technologies in a way that are also compatible with the democratic values of your societies. And I think this relationship, again, between technology and democracy has changed with the pandemic in terms of a lot of governments are now regulating much more some of the technologies. And again, this is not like a divide between rich and poor countries. For example, one of the most advanced countries in terms of regulation of new technologies to make sure that it doesn't infringe human rights, let's say, is Chile with the regulation of neurotechnologies and neuro rights, for example, which is very far off ahead. But there's a lot of issues that are really global in nature, and unless we have spaces for collaboration, that we try to align some of these values, that would be difficult. And that maybe my last point here is about the value of digital nation as what we call a mini-lateralism, like a small group of countries that maybe share a number of values and also maybe that have more experience, or let's say not necessarily more developed, but have made more failures in terms of the digital transformation in the past and have progressed most. But I think there's a very, very important value in this stage, especially at this juncture, where the decisions we make about how we're going to use technologies for good are going to be critical globally. And groupings such as the digital nations also can help maybe articulate some standards that then can grow in other, let's say, more multilateral forums, let's say the G20, the OECD, the bank, and the UN. And I think that's maybe one of the areas of exploration is how that works in practice. But I think there's a lot of value, and in the OECD in particular, as I was mentioning, for example, around digital identity, that has been very tremendously useful to draw on the knowledge of groups such as those that have more experience in some issues. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Yes, thank you.
OECD는 디지털 정보에 대한
I understand that OECD has guidelines, frameworks about digital governments to pave the way for digital governments in the future, and I could really see that they contributed greatly to the development and the provision of quality services to our general public. So we not only provide support, but it's also important that we provide good support to lead everything to success. Next, I'm going to throw out the second question. From a different perspective, it goes to our representatives from the UK and Estonia, our leaders in digital governments on the global platform. You're the pioneers in this space. And I believe you get many requests for international cooperation. So in terms of cooperation and your contributions to the globe, what challenges did you face and what tough parts did you come across? So I'd like to invite Mr. Lucas Ilves to speak from Estonia first.
Thank you. So I want to disagree at least a little bit with our colleagues on the question of the digital divide, or at least to nuance it a bit. And I don't want to say it doesn't exist, but it's a very lumpy one, and as a couple of you have mentioned, it's unevenly distributed, which is to say we see emerging and developing countries that are actually fantastically good at digital government. And frequently, we also see OECD members, thankfully none of the digital nations, who are terrible at digital government, especially some of the larger OECD countries. They really haven't figured out how to make it work. Whereas India, Bangladesh, two quite large emerging countries, have built fantastic infrastructure, deployed it, built services on top of it. Just to name two examples, we're working closely with Ukraine, which is somewhere in the middle as a middle-income country, and have much to learn from them. So I think one of the things we maybe need to get out of is a notion that the knowledge transfer is a unidirectional one, and that the collaboration and the cooperation is one of sending resources from developed, wealthy countries to emerging countries. This comes back to, I think, what was always the original kind of spirit of development cooperation, although it often has gotten lost in these projects, which is really cooperation and collaboration and learning in two directions. One example just that Estonia is engaged in right now that's been mentioned is that we are looking to bring back some of the code and the tools that Ukraine has developed on top of our frameworks, both our code and our regulatory and conceptual frameworks, into the Estonian ecosystem, because they had the benefit of doing some of the things we did, but they did them in 2020. And so they did them using a startup mindset. they had very good user design from day one, and they have a much more mobile-friendly ecosystem providing the same services we do, but I would say in some cases in a better manner than we do. But then this brings us to the question of how should we collaborate? As our moderator has alluded, there is just an administrative capacity problem for advanced digital governments today. Never mind bilateral things, just the multilateral formats. I could spend every single week of the year at an intergovernmental format of one form or another before we even get into the various kinds of conferences and anything bilateral. And Estonia is 50, 60 times smaller than the UK, so we can handle even fewer than Tom can. And so in that light, I'd like to highlight two things that we are working on. The first is digital public goods. And for us, what digital public goods means is jointly building software and components. So moving from a model of simply sharing and collaborating, which is very important. Yes, sharing your tools as open source is important, but the question is, does anyone actually use them? To the point where we actually come together and build things jointly. So we've done a very small example of this for 10 years now with, well, for 5 years in practice with Finland and Iceland around our interoperability platform. There are some other positive international examples, and now in the context of the GovStack initiative co-founded by the ITU, Estonia, Germany, although in Germany the development assistance part of the government, not the digital government part of the government, and now with other members including India and so on. The idea is to build common core components of digital government, and the challenge I've set to my technical teams is that they don't view it as a development assistance project. So the goal is not to help Mauritius have better e-government. That's also nice. The goal is for us actually to be present in this project and contributing as a user of these tools and components so that we end up having the same tools and components in Estonia that are being used in Mauritius. Because that's when we actually get economies of scale. That's when we really get to the point where we can share practical operational knowledge back and forth. You know, I can have a whole different discussion with someone who has deployed the same code that I'm running than someone who has deployed something similar done by a bunch of consultants hired with a very nice, UN World Bank or, in our case, EU, once upon a time funded project. I don't want to put anyone down here. It's just that's how sometimes these big procurements and projects go. And I think the same thing applies to GovTech. We're moving past the phase where, yes, we have to incubate it and putting money into incubators and so on is good. The real challenge with GovTech is actually creating common and consistent markets and technical interfaces for these startups to sell to. So my previous job, I was working for a tech startup, and the oxygen of a startup and a tech company is customers, more so even than just money in a raw sense. And so what I really want is, as a startup, I want a consistent journey with my customers, with a platform I've built can work across many geographies. So there again, the challenge with GovTech is to standardize enough that a GovTech startup can actually work in multiple countries. We can incubate really cool things in Estonia and the UK and Korea, but if they can't leave those markets and can't grow, they won't be useful. And I think maybe just to set a final sort of high goal before I close, I would like emerging out of digital public goods and GovTech to see GovTech companies from the emerging world offering successfully their services across the developing world. I think that's when we know that we've really been successful in this iteration of collaboration. Thank you.
네, 차관님 말씀 감사드립니다.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Ilves. You provided a new perspective on digital cooperation. Just like you mentioned, I do not believe that we should approach this from a completely binary, well-off and underdeveloped countries. And I think you really touched on this agenda greatly. And you also hinted on the potential of digital public goods and the cooperation that can be occurring there. And next, I would like to invite Mr. Tom Reed to comment.
Yeah, thank you. And the famous clock is ticking down, so I will try to be brief. I think from the UK side, we also lack resources. From the UK side, I think what's worked well is where we've been able to act as an exemplar for getting things done. As we talked about in another session today, digital transformation in government, it's brand new, and a lot of people find it quite daunting, and they find it difficult to persuade their ministers and their finance departments to fund them. So if we can be exemplars of, we tried some things, this worked, this didn't work, I think that can give confidence and case studies to developing nations, which is really helpful. Secondly, as Lucas mentioned, digital public goods, everything we build at GDS is open source, it's all freely available, and I think that should be helpful. We're not all that different, I don't think, in the services we offer to the public. And I think also we can offer advice on the structural changes you need to make these things happen, because often it is the context and the environment which actually makes things happen. And you can only learn those things by failing multiple times and pushing water uphill until you learn. In terms of challenges we've had, my frustration is often we have really good bilaterals or group sessions, but you don't always see the change actually coming out of that. And I think that's for another couple of reasons. One is, I feel like often in digital government, it's a bit of an echo chamber. We're talking to people who already believe in digital transformation and want to make it work. The people who aren't in the room are the finance directors and the policy leads and the permanent secretaries and the ministers, we have some ministers. And if you don't have them in the room, you teach people who already know most of it some stuff, and they go back and try to explain and then get blocked. And so I think that's quite frustrating. I think there are some, again, to agree with something Lucas said, I've seen some case studies in developing nations where we can spend a small, a few days giving some advice and learning two ways. Some of the big tech companies will put masses of resources in. They will put a team in for weeks and months. And I think there's a real risk that some of the developing nations end up in the kind of vendor lock-in that we were in 20 years ago and have just learnt not to do again. And I think we haven't found a way yet to counteract that. Yeah, I'll start. I said I was going to be brief. I'm not. I'm going to stop there. So those are some of the challenges we've had. Thank you.
네, 원장님 말씀 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much.
말씀 주신 대로
And as you've mentioned, digital transformation in the experts' discussion and the consensus reached from the experts' discussion on digital governance and transformation. I mean, having that discussion reach the lay people and other bigger groups of people is not an easy task. And I think that's a challenge that Korea feels as well. So whether it's leading advanced countries or developing countries, those are common challenges that we face. And the vendor lock-in issue that you just mentioned, that also is a continuing challenge for us as well, particularly for developing countries, underdeveloped countries. They may be exposed to more danger, it seems. We don't have much time remaining. However, with digital nations and with on the role that digital nations should play in the international community, if there's anyone among the panelists who would like to speak on this topic, please go ahead.
So I'm mindful of the clock, so I'm going to be very, very brief. Even in those countries have been very successful, UK, Estonia, Korea, Singapore, Denmark, it is not a story of complete success along the path. So one thing that countries actually, we abandoned many years ago the idea of the bank that there was one solution, a best practice for everybody. So to look into different models is good, and people learn from what has been successful in other countries. But what people learn more about it is what they have failed in other countries. So that's something that you may want to keep in mind, Korea, the UK, and Estonia, not only to tell the good side of the story, but actually the stones you find along the way, and that's the ones that developing countries or countries that want to look after you as an example may want to avoid. There's no need of two countries stumbling in the same rock twice.
네, 정말 좋은 지적이셨습니다.
That was a very good point that you just made.
한국 정부도 예전에
The Korean
실패
government
간담회라는
also
이름으로
held what's called a failure expo or failure
공유하고
exhibition because we wanted to share our failed cases with the international community. In the international community in particular, of course, the face of a country, the reputation of a country is very important. However, as you pointed out, I mean, if you really want to have good exchanges, there has to be sharing of information about both the successes and the failures. The DN has its working groups through which we can share our activities with the international community. So we will have that in mind as we do those activities.
혹시 더 이상 뭐 특별히 주실 말씀?
Any other panelists who would like to speak? Yes, please go ahead.
One quick point which hasn't been mentioned here. The struggle that's going on is in lawmaking. Engage your parliamentarians, and that knowledge has to be imparted because countries, and Arthur mentioned, and we saw that e-signature was a struggle. Even today, in many countries, laws do not exist which would facilitate the government to move into digital mode. And parliamentarians' role is critical, and most of them are not embracing it in the developing world. Again, I don't want to mention it's a north-south divide. Knowledge exists everywhere, but just look at the hardware. Who has the monopoly? And we need to focus on those factors. Thank you.
네, 맞는 말씀이십니다.
Yes, you have rightly pointed out the fact that knowledge can easily be shared, but the hardware, the physical aspects of the sharing is also important. The finance, the funding, and the physical stumbling blocks such as the legislation and the legal system are all important. Of course, they're all very important. They're not easy, but we will remember those comments that you've made. Thank you. I believe our panel discussion time is up. If there's no further discussion, then we will conclude here. You have shared with us a lot of insights today, and I'm sure they will be very helpful in Digital Nation's future activities. The digital leading governments have not made this progress on their own, and there will be continuous digitalization in the international community. Data flow and data distribution will happen globally in the future. And so digital nations will play a bigger role, and to continue to grow, of course, we need to continue to cooperate with the entire international community. Thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you very much for the insightful panel discussion. We will now have a 15-minute coffee break. I will see you back at 15:35. Once again, I would like to thank all of our panelists and our speakers. I'll see you again in a moment. Forum. First, we will hear from the President of National Information Society Agency, Mr. Hwang Jong-sung, and hear all about data strategies for digital transition. So, Mr. President, please step up to the stage.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon. So on behalf of NIA, once again, I'd like to thank for participating to this event. Today, I'm going to give my thought about the relationship between data strategy and digital transformation. Today's presentation has two parts. First one is what is digital transformation. The second is how to make that happen. So focusing on data strategy. So in last September, President Yoon Suk-yeol announced the vision of a digital nation in New York. So which declare so Korea will lead the global efforts to develop some kind of new digital order, and also promised to make Korea a kind of digital model nation. So why? The Korea president stressed digital transformation, digitalization, and digital order is because we think it is very critical time in terms of digital transformation. So digital transformation, it is not new anyway. Digital transformation has been with us for a long time. A very long time. So we are now using, and we are now interacting with many results of digital transformation. Electronic government, fintech, and many services is actually the result of digital transformation. But one thing important is that not all digital transformation they are not same in its importance and its impact. So the digital transformation that will come in years, we think will be much more fundamental and much more disruptive, and bring about much big changes to our life. So I'd like to share with the three big changes that is expected at the moment as digital transformation. The first thing is to the first thing is data-driven society. So during the last 20 or more years, the world has digitalized everything. So digitalization means bring real world to cyber world. So someone called it datafication. But now the coming world will go one step further. That means that not only bring real world to cyber world, the future world will move digital world to the real world. We call that data driven. So the real life will be very importantly affected by data in the cyberspace. That is the data driven. The second thing. The world is entering a new era, but the headache is that at the moment there is no proper word to express this trend. So I used unfamiliar wording, artificialization. But anyway, so now the world is entering a new era. So unlike industrialization or industrial society, which turn natural resources into product, the new world will create something necessary artificially. So there are many examples. So artificial intelligence might be the most prominent. So instead of training people for a long time, so nowadays many companies and many societies is going to use artificial intelligence. So it will reduce the burden of skills or skill training, but we can expect many more artificial something. So in terms of energy, or when it comes to labor shortage problem. So as you know, Korea is suffering from depopulation, so to reduce the population. But we expect the future will be different because we can use artificial labor. So such kind of trend is now changing the real life. So when we think about smart city, so some smart city can be characterized as kind of integration of the different separate functions together. Right? So enable residents to do many things. Which they couldn't do before. So based on technology, the last big change will be the change from deterministic to probabilistic. So ICT system or industrial society, institution or policy, all those things are deterministic. So once we set up application or rule, then the result is actually fixed, deterministic. But big data analytics or AI actually require any societies to be probabilistic. So one example is public transportation. So the public transportation route has been fixed, but now more and more cities is now trying to new system, probabilistic. So the probabilistic society will be emerged not only in terms of the transportation, but also in every policy areas. There are a big thing. Second, then how to make that happen? So it's the data. So the critical point here is that cyber world or data. So in the past, in the information age, it is universal. So there's no boundary between country or between region or between everything. So the challenge for us is to make anyone to connect to this cyber world. Once anyone connected, then the cyber world has no boundary or has no something. So it is universal world. But the world we are now building up is actually local. It is local. So data. Some country or some cities will have a data platform that enable the very wonderful flow or sharing of data. But other cities will not have such data infrastructure. So quite local, because in the future, the data will be used not in the cyberspace, but in the real space. So data is real. So big headache is to make data shared, but unlike this picture, I get this picture from Wikipedia. It is very interesting. A lady is willingly, voluntarily bring her data to the repository. Actually, I don't think it is the case in the real world, nothing. So the government, we're developing in countries, we need to have data realism, not idealism. So many things, the challenge related with the data will be solved anyway. They think because there are many vendors, industries, and many technologies, but I don't think. There should be the distinction between some place solve the problem, some place fail to solve the problem. So big difference. So I think EU has wonderful data strategy which stress the role of data space. The Korea government has developed many data strategies, but now we know that it's time to fundamentally redesign our data strategy. So the Korea government, so the digital platform government, is one of our efforts. So you can, in order to understand the digital platform government, what is the comparable? What is something that we can compare? So traditional e-government is actually digital application government or digital system government. Application system is actually focused on process to tackle any specific problem. This is the digital application system, but digital platform. So it is how to say kind of common and general infrastructure that can help solve many different problems. So this is just a very beautiful and simple architecture. Actually, I have in mind when I designed the Korea's national pilot smart city. But my conclusion is that we need to first. It is the responsibility of any government and any company, so any players to build a data infrastructure for digital transformation. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your.
Thank you very much, President Hwang, for your presentation. We will now move on to invited special sessions by our experts. First of all, we have Mr. Yang Jung-gyu from the Korea Minting and Security Printing Corporation.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. I'm Jung-gyu Yang, Digitalized Project Team Manager at Korea Minting and Security Printing Corporation, or KOMSCO. I'm honored to deliver a presentation on behalf of KOMSCO. Today, I will mostly focus on explaining how Korea's mobile driver's license is used, which is an example of a trusted network or blockchain and DID-based mobile ID service. This is how my presentation is organized. Okay. First, an overview of KOMSCO. COMSCO, it's been more than 7 decades since COMSCO was established back in 1951. For more than 5 decades, since 1970, we have been exporting banknotes, coins, security paper, ink, etc. Roughly 1,400 skilled professionals are working for the company. Simply, we are a total solution provider for securities to security solution. We mainly produce security printing products such as banknotes, coins, security paper, and ink. We also make ID products such as a wide range of public ID cards, which include a passport, national ID card, which is more widely known as resident registration card in Korea, etc. We have recently been making an aggressive move with a focus on digital transformation, creating a new market. Digitizing conventional security printing, we have introduced new technology or a new way of protecting a brand. We are also envisioning a blockchain technology-based mobile payment and mobile ID market. All in all, we are committed to providing social and economic benefit for the public and the entire nation. Let me move on to the mobile ID. What is ID card, by the way? It is an individual's identification document officially issued and certified by the government. There are 3 ID cards in Korea. Resident registration card, so-called national ID card, passport, and driver's license. When a baby is born, he or she is registered with a resident registration number, and once he reaches a certain age, he gets the national ID card. Since the passport is used abroad, resident registration card is the single most widely used national ID in Korea. However, a driver's license can be also used as an official ID because it contains resident registration number as well. However, the current identification system is very vulnerable to falsification and tampering. Since the government announced abolishment of accredited certificates 2 years ago, service providers are launching many different private certificates, and this highlighted the so-called Big Brother issues. Besides, there are growing concerns for the country becoming a surveillance state when it comes to privacy. The concerns fuel a chaos with remote working and contactless environment caused by the pandemic. Now I talk about paradigm shift to digital ID. There is a huge paradigm shift caused by COVID-19 in identification. First is siloed centralized identification, where personal information is stored and controlled by individual service providers. Data control is complex, but there is no other options if you were to access the service. Okay. Next, in federated identification, one can choose OAuth method to resolve these advantages of the centralized scheme. However, there is a risk of bulk of data theft and the Big Brother issue because personal data is centralized. Okay. In this centralized identification, individuals, not service provider, own and use personal data required for identification. Service providers can verify personal information only when and if required, without storing them in their system. This is called SSI, self-sovereign identity. Okay. Now to DID and VC. DID is technical implementation of SSI. In a narrower sense, a DID is a unique identifier in DID blockchain network. Individuals can save identity credentials from their phone, which can be verified with VC identification. VC stands for verifiable credential. Okay. VC is linked to random identification since it grouped with DID in DID document, and it contains digital signature of VC issuer. When identification is required, an individual submits VC to verifier. And the process is called VP, which stands for verifiable presentation. The identity of the individual is verified by a DID blockchain infrastructure, which uses blockchain trusted network. Such technology can resolve risk of surveillance society. Now on mobile ID, DID technology can be more effectively used when it is used on mobile. The Korean government is visioning for digital future with these latest technologies. From public's perspective, they get to provide a minimum amount of personal information online and offline. Second, the government perspective, it is building single digital ID platform. Third, from service providers' perspective, it is creating more useful services with better security features. Mobile ID enables people to verify their identity online, authenticate websites, confirms transactions, and put digital signature. They are, after all, an inclusive solution. Service provider can create innovative applications and services based on DID with this trusted relation. DID-based mobile ID can provide huge benefit for citizens while offering economic benefit to service providers. Okay, up to this point, I explained why the Korean government has decided to introduce digital ID using blockchain DID technology. Now, let's take a look at the mobile ID project in South Korea. Probably it should be identified as the progress of world first national DID reference. Knowing such nature of digital ID technology, the Korean government decided to adopt blockchain DID for national digital ID and created a roadmap. As a first pilot project, it developed mobile public officer ID in the year 2020. Currently, it is used by more than 47,000 people. Last year, mobile driver's license has been developed and it was launched in January this year, along with other services. In accordance with roadmap, certificates for the person of distinguished honor, youth ID card, foreigner registration card, and national ID will be issued on blockchain DID platform sooner or later. Mobile civil servant ID is currently used to enter government offices, log on to business system, borrow books from library, and access office cafeteria. Mobile driver's license is issued by the Road Traffic Authority, which was entrusted with issuance business from police agency in South Korea. In cashless society, we do not need to carry around a plastic card anymore, and mobile phone alone is enough. To that end, the government set out three main principles. First, as national ID, public trust should be guaranteed. Second, by building secure and trusted single national platform, a number of other IDs will be added. Third, they can be used in many places for the convenience of the public. Okay. However, to achieve this, we considered over several issues. As an issuer, how are we going to ensure public trust in national ID? How are we going to safely store them in personal devices? And how are we going to handle various personal data and credentials? On the other hand, from verifier's perspective, how are we going to prove my identity? How are we going to ensure legal safety of my mobile ID? And how are we increase use of it across the nation? Okay. This is the trusted issuance process we came up with. First, citizens visit a driving test center. Second, they fill out issuance application. Third, they verify their identity in person and submit application. Fourth, get QR or ID card issued. Fifth, have a mobile driver's license issued remotely. Okay. Sixth, registration authentication method such as facial recognition. These are the pictures of a mobile driver's license app and smart driver's license. People can get their license reissued without visiting the issuing center by tagging the IC chip on their mobile phone. The first use case of a mobile driver's license is to prove your identity to a police officer, like this. Second use case, for a civil servant verifying your identity at their office. The third, for online accounting opening. In Korea, the latest technology is adopted for banking business, but banks verify their customer in a very conservative manner. With the Real Name Act, Korea requires financial institutions to thoroughly inspect their customers. For the top level of assurance, they require in-person identification because banks are equipped with the latest technologies. Face-to-face verification is a kind of an obstacle to banks. Okay. However, with the mobile driver's license providing facial recognition, banks are now able to verify name of their customers online in compliance of the law. Okay. The next use case is identification on e-government website. The next fifth one use case is identification required to borrow electronic scooter and vehicle. Okay. So far, I have explained why the government decided to adopt blockchain DID technology-based digital ID. Now, let's look into expectation and mobile ID ecosystem. Okay. An issuer will jointly issue various ID cards as the network that serves as the nation's public backbone. And it will be able to improve public service and decision-making process by leading innovation of national digital ID. Since users can control their personal information with SSI, self-sovereign identity, the public can now provide minimum amount of their personal information, exercising their data sovereignty, which will guarantee safety of public's personal data. As a service provider, verifiers should guarantee credibility and security of the license, reduce a burden of identification cost, and make it more trusted and beneficial in various settings. Currently, now is over 35,000 people have already got their mobile driver's license. And we have launched 53 services, and we'll provide 47 services shortly. Especially, as I mentioned, mobile driver's license related services are mostly popular in financial sector. Most of banks in Korea start to allow their customer to open bank account without face-to-face verification. They say it is a kind of a financial innovation. DID-based ecosystem will create many new services in public and private sectors. So I believe that digital ID will be a gateway to digital era and an international standard. That is all my presentation. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yang, for your presentation. Next, we invite Kwon Oh-yeon from Code for Korea for your presentation. Please come up the stage.
Good afternoon. My name is Kwon Oh-yeon. I'm a civic hacker of Code for Korea. Code for Korea is the civic hackers network in Korea. We are normal citizens who just want to challenge social issues around us with digital technology. Today, I want to share our story, how we collaborate with the government to overcome COVID-19. When the shortage of mask supply happened at early COVID-19 stage in Korea, We civic hackers in Korea and our governments made hundreds of mask apps together. Governments provided public open data of mask stocks, and each citizen built lots of mask apps with those open data. These public mask stock apps helped to overcome nationwide mask shortage problems at a very early stage. There were lots of COVID-related apps made by citizens from the beginning of COVID-19, and those apps used information from the website made the governments, but unfortunately, these informations were not machine readable. So we thought that if governments provided public open data related to COVID-19, many citizens can join to solve our current social issues in various ways. So we, COVID-19 civic hackers or citizens, gathered as COVID-19 Open Data Alliance, and we made a proposal about COVID-19 open data to our government. This is our actual proposal document. As you can see, we provide some background why government should provide open data related to COVID-19 and core values and data sets and principles what we expect. We prepared some real examples for precise data set, not to confuse government officers. You can see what data we wrote as examples in Korean. Yeah. And one of the data set we proposed was the mask stock data. In Korea, even if there's not mask shortage problems yet, we thought shortage problems of protective gear soon possible based on the news of all around the world. So we proposed to our government to provide public open data from statistics data, confirmed cases, clinics, and the distribution places and stock data of protective gears like mask. Luckily, our government was already preparing a public mask policy at that time when our mask stock policy first started. Almost at the same time, mask stock apps made by civic hackers and startups also released together. So we, civic hackers and government, can prepare this open data, open API, and lots of apps together from the beginning of the policy. First, COVID-19 Open Data Alliance, we gathered citizens to make an app and test API and data in 2 or 3 days. We made COVID-19 Open Data Handbook to guide people in developing mask apps. This is image of our handbook, which describes how to join community, how to contribute to this guide, how to use mask stock API, and how to register your app quickly, etc. At the same time, National Information Agency and some big tech company provided servers and quick app registration services whoever wants to develop a mask app. So we also add some guide about how to get a support. And just within 2 weeks, and actually 3 days from the beginning, an app and API were developed in a week. This is a whole timeline. Every apps use the same API endpoint all together. When we opened our apps, 90 billion API calls per day occurred, and 7 billion maximum calls per hour on the first day. Lots of apps were developed, but because so many people want to know stock status, apps made by civic hackers were used wisely. But like data API were provided by big tech company NHN, mask apps also were on the cloud servers provided by tech company like KT. So app and API services were quite stable, even though it was the first day. From pharmacies, data gathered by government, infra operated by big tech company, and various apps made by civic hackers. I think this was our key aspect to overcome lack of mask stock problems. So we can overcome the mask situation a little quietly, and also government realized more to overcome the COVID-19 situation. Government should trust and collaborate more with lots of citizens. So we talked with the officers what data we will release next together. And this experience leaves huge benefits and trust in citizens. Many citizens said that they realized the role and importance of governments, and also as a citizen, they can do something for society together. I think trust between citizens and governments is the key for the good digital relations. This is our whole flows of collaboration between governments and big tech company and civic hackers and pharmacists. With this collaboration in Korea, we can provide public mask API and app in real time, reliable, stable, and quick and massively. Other open data we requested released from government also, like beach crowdiness of 50 more famous beaches in Korea. And we also collaborated with government to protect privacy, to collect and trust information safely when using the facility. And we, COVID-19 Open Data Alliance is now became Code of Korea. In Korea, lots of civic hacking communities already exist, but we didn't connect well. So we are trying to be small communities to work together and also connect government and companies. We are re-networking citizens who want to contribute to society with their technology. This is our story about collaboration as a citizen with government to overcome COVID-19. As I presented before, we had a great experience to work with lots of fellow citizens and governments within 2 years. When I worked as a civic hacker, I think this is our society and we are responsible for these problems. It was a great experience to get a chance to participate and collaborate to critical social problems. And with these experiences, we felt the role of government is important and we can trust our government also. Social issues become more complex and require the participation and consent of ordinary people. I think good digital nation or society could achieve not only by the quality of the government services, but also participation and collaboration of citizens. I hope this trust of citizens and collaboration with governments will be further promoted. Thank you very much.
감사합니다, 대표님.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Next, we will have a second panel discussion on the digital capacity of public institutions. It will be moderated by Director Son Sung-ju of Global Government Digital Cooperation. And as panelists, we would like to invite Mr. Lee Jae-ho from NIA, Mr. Paul James from New Zealand, and Pascal Elvis, Executive Director from Canada, and João Dias from Portugal, Administrative Digitalization Agency. Thank you very much. Once we have finished rearranging the stage, we would like to invite you onto the stage. Thank you.
감사합니다. 패널분들께서는 무대로 이동해
Thank you. Would like to invite the panelists up on the stage once again. Thank you.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much. So we had a panel discussion, part 1, and I will be moderating this part 2 as well. In this session, we'd like to look at the enhancement of digital capacity in the public sector. The government, it's not easy for the government to secure digital capacity. The digital experts, there's a lack of these experts in the private sector also, and with more digitalization, there's been higher demand for these talents. But despite that, to have effective government service delivery, we need to secure the needed digital talents within the public sector. So to secure, what kinds of efforts should be in place to secure these talents? What are the stumbling blocks? How can we overcome them? Those are the topics that we will discuss in this session. So I have a few questions that I have prepared, so I'm going to give these questions to our panelists. The first question is for New Zealand and Canada. So the first question is, so in your governments, to secure the IT talents and to maintain these talents, what kinds of efforts have your governments been putting in place? So Canada, would you like to go ahead first?
Yes, thank you. In Canada, we recognize that talent is the delivery engine of government. And back in 2018, the government created the Canadian Digital Service to try to create better talent pipelines from outside government. So we tried to rebrand government as a place where you can make a difference for your country, where you could come contribute to mission-driven work for a short period of time. You could do a stint, work on some of the big, wicked problems that governments face, like immigration or defense. And we knew that we were trying to attract folks that didn't necessarily want a 30-year handshake with the public service, didn't necessarily want a pension or a long-standing career in government. And then just recently, over the summer, we released Canada's Digital Ambition. And one of the 4 pillars of this ambition is talent. And we've established a Chief Talent Officer for the Government of Canada. And we've recognized that we have over 8,000 vacancies in the digital community across Canada. So that's about a 30% vacancy rate. And so now with dedicated capacity, we've really tried to organize ourselves to deliver and to put horsepower behind the commitment to recruit from outside government, but also to create better career pathways for those who join, and to ensure that we have capacity on demand when we face crises like the global pandemic.
네, 말씀 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much. The Canadian government has announced a recent plan, a strategy, and part of that is a focus on securing the needed talents. So among the public servants, they, of course, needed this intangible value that they can derive from their work in the form of contributing to a nation. So that will be a very important aspect to deal with. So it's not just that they're after monetary compensation, but the psychological or motivational values will be very important in attracting the needed talents. Thank you very much for your answer. Next, New Zealand, please.
Thank you. I thought I'd speak a little bit about the role that immigration's played in our talent within government. So COVID really demonstrated for us, as barriers came down and it halted the flow of people into the country, the role that immigration had played in bolstering and building the digital workforce for New Zealand. We worked with the private sector who were very concerned about this to look at how we might convince government to make some policy changes, exceptions to enable digital talent to come into the country. It's been quite positive working with the private sector. It's taken us to a few places. One of those has been a bit more of a detailed exploration about the workforce in the country, not just in the public service, but the private sector too. That's identified that we actually turn out a reasonable number of graduates from universities, etc. Not enough, but a reasonable number. But they have real challenges getting jobs. And private sector firms are strongly preferring to take people with 4 to 6 years experience and really relying on immigration to achieve that. So that's really helped us all look at it and say, well, actually, we need to do things differently. The private sector actually needs to step forward and create better pathways for graduates into their firms, alongside the public sector as well. We've run a very successful graduate program for several years. We're looking at how we could partner with the private sector around that to expand it and roll it out into the private sector as well. As part of that, we've got putting in place an industry transformation program that's led by our economic ministry, and that industry transformation program will focus in part on the skills development in the sector, and that will flow through into the public sector.
In fact, you have pointed out something very important. So the IT talents needed would not really differ between the private and the public sector. So I think it's important to grow the size of the pie, which will ensure that we will have enough talents for both the public and the private sectors in dealing with the digital work. And of course, this is not going to be an easy path, but New Zealand is trying to adopt different policies, taking different measures to address this issue, which was very impressive. Thank you. Let's go on to the second question. So this time, again, this is for New Zealand and Portugal. The government, what should the government do to enhance the digital capacity of the public officials? Are there official methods or programs run by the government? Is there a government education agency? Is there an education program to upskill the digital capacity of the public officials? Can we begin with New Zealand, please?
I thought I'd just reference 3 things. So never miss a good opportunity, and COVID was a great opportunity for digital government agencies to remind the rest of the public sector that the role that digital played in their business. So as government agencies scrambled to make sure that their digital services could still operate in a COVID environment, as they realised the significance of digital into their business, it really helped us coach, support and open awareness for chief executives, senior level executives around digital. So we spent a bit of time on taking that opportunity. We have a leadership development centre in the public service in New Zealand that offers leadership programs in a range of levels, and this year, in fact, just about to start, we're putting in place a first cohort on a leadership and practice program, which will be a small group of digital leaders with promise in the public sector. Now, they won't just be technical digital leaders, they could be service delivery leaders, but other people that have digital in their work. It's a 9-month program. They do it while they're still in role in their work. They're out of the office for about 3 or 4 weeks in total, but it runs over 9 months. And that's all aimed at building leadership capacity in digital for the leaders of the future in the public sector. We're also looking, in the third example, we're looking at little things. So privacy, as everyone knows, is a critical part of going digital. We're really conscious of needing to continue to professionalise the privacy officials in New Zealand. We don't have enough. There's great demands on their times, but it can't just be the work of the privacy official as well, that all digital leaders and service delivery leaders need to have these skills. So we're putting in place a micro-credential scheme that we're building with a university domestically. It'll be 4 to 6 online modules that people can do while they're at work, all based at building their privacy expertise, which will be crucial in a digital environment. So a few different examples there.
Thank you very much for your answer. And in fact, in the public sector, the policy decision makers should have to grow their leadership. Rather than a detailed understanding of the technology, they need to understand the overall digitalization flow and grow the capacity to make the digital decisions. So that was a very impressive example. And also, privacy is also indeed a very important aspect. It is a public aspect that has to be dealt with by the government, and so enhancing understanding among the leaders on privacy issue is another important work that you do. Thank you very much for the sharing.
Next, can we hear from Mr. Joao Diaz, please?
Okay, good afternoon to everyone, to my colleagues. And first of all, I'd like to thank for the great presentations of this afternoon. It was very rich and interesting. I've learned a lot. And trying to answer your question, so digital skills and digital training is a very strategic and a priority in our national digital policy. Our national action plan for digital transformation has three main pillars: people, companies or economy, and public administration. And precisely the first pillar, people, has a great focus in digital skills and digital training. As the representative of the United Nations has mentioned, we believe that technology is not enough, that we need people and we need to train people, especially in digital skills and ICT technologies. So basically, we have this national action plan, and what we try to address is different levels of training. So we start with the basic education. We included ICT topics and issues in the young kids curricula. Then we have a couple of programs to cover skilling, reskilling, and upskilling of workers, both in the private and the public sector. I'm just going to give you one example. We also has reached one public-private partnership where universities have a reskilling program for workers that want to reskill themselves in ICT and digital skills. And then the private sector, the companies that are members of this program, they have the commitment to hire these people. So when they do the training, and if they succeed, they know the outcome, that they will get a job in an ICT company or a tech company, which is very interesting. On top of that, we also have in Portugal this national agency that provides training to the public sector. And there they also have a range of programs, but mainly for civil servants. We try to deal with basic ICT and digital skills for all civil servants, but we also have more digital leadership for managers as well, and even more technical programs in emergent technologies like AI, data technologies, natural language processing for ICT professionals in the public sector. And I would end up with this project that we have. We are creating this national portal where we try to get this overall supply of programs, and with a kind of a simulator that would help any citizen to go there, to answer some questions, and to have a kind of diagnosis and some orientation which program best applies to his objectives. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 디지털 역량 강화
Yes, thank you very much. So I was very impressed by there was an agency that's in charge, exclusively in charge of digital skill training and reskilling and upskilling. So, and I also understand that you provided tailored training to different users. And I would like another opportunity to hear more about those trainings. Thank you. And the third question is, do you have any expert groups within the government that, so there's a IT specialized support group? If there is such a group within your government, what specific role do they play? I would like to hear from Korea and Portugal. And can we hear Portugal once again, please, to start off?
Okay, thank you. So our agency, our modernization agency, is a kind of horizontal cross-government agency. And within our agency, we have two main unities, departments. One is what we call LabX, which is a department that works with other public sectorial entities from other ministries to help them to redesign and to do some re-engineering of their process and services before they provide them online. So we provide this service to other public entities. At the same time, on the other hand, we also have this other unit, which is TCAP, which is a center for ICT, and we provide here building blocks, some digital public goods, which are open source technological components that are needed whenever an entity, a public entity, wants to provide public services online. So, and these two work together. So first, we help to redesign the services to get a more great user experience. And then we help them using these building blocks so they can provide services in a more cost-effective and more efficient way, and also to gain more coherence across all public entities. And on top of that, we also have ICT Forum, which is coordinated by our agency, but under the guidance of our Secretary of State, which is the CETIC, where we have representatives from all the ministries and where we discuss this national strategy for ICT and where we have an action plan that we monitor in order to achieve our goals.
Yes, thank you very much. So once again, you have an expert group and it provides horizontal, cross-cutting support across the government. I would also like to stress that the Ministry of Interior and Safety supports the government in terms of the ICT, and I think they play a similar role, so I also hope for another opportunity for further discussion. And I would now like to hear from the Korean representative, please.
Thank you for having me. Last May, there was a presidential election in Korea. President Yoon Suk-yeol promised to make a pan-government organization for digitalization. And he launched it last September. That is Digital Platform Government Committee, maybe. I think you already know. Through this committee, the president and the ruling party want to drive the digital leadership. In order to realize the efficient and the best digital government, that is we all want to make, right? It is so important to coordinate and share and integrate the data across the whole public sector. Moreover, a strong partnership with the private sectors are also required. The committee is considering to raise investment from the private sectors, like Korean big tech platforms, Naver or Kakao, etc. On the other hand, it is extremely important to put the committee's policies into practice for the better life as an enabler. The NIA has been doing its best effort to take actions, planning, budgeting, project management, and assessment and evaluations with the Ministry of the Interior and Safety. Just yesterday, the NIA formed the department only to support the digital platform government with 4 teams, about 6 staff. And behind these 4 teams, about 650 staff are supporting the digital platform government project. Thank you.
네, 말씀 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much for your statement, for explaining the situation in Korea. So to secure the policy drive, we have formed a group in which the private sector is participating to increase the expertise of the group. So we are attempting different types of governance, and so we have a very dynamic approach in trying to secure the digital capacity for the government. Naturally, we will go on to the next question. So we're going to ask not a pan-governmental support, but rather whether there are groups or agencies that provide assistance to a specific agency or department. So is there an organization that specializes in IT, for example, as it focuses also in welfare or social security issues, for example? So we'd like to ask Korea for the answer first to this question.
There are more digital specialized organizations in Korea. And I would like to introduce two organizations. First is NIRS and then KISA, which are playing important roles. They are close working partners with the NIA. NIRS stands for National Information Resources Service. Simply, that is an organization which is running national database and then data centers for public sector. NIRS has been integrating government systems and data for a long time. NIRS is running several data centers in order to make backup and uninterrupted services for a citizen. And recently, it is extending its role to provide big data and the cloud computing services to the public sector. When it comes to privacy and security, I'd like to introduce KISA, we call it KISA, and then Korea Internet and Security Agency. KISA has a responsibility and specialties in making safer cyber online security and protecting privacy problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you mentioned, in Korea, we have a professional or specialized agency for security issues. And there are many other agencies which has both the IT expertise needed to do its work. Now I'd like to ask Canada for your example.
Great, and I'll try to be very brief because I know we only have about 2 minutes left. For us, we have two agencies focused on cybersecurity, so CSIS and CSEC. So for communications security and then sort of our Secret Service equivalent. We also have an agency called Shared Services Canada, which is responsible for providing IT infrastructure services to departments. So to try to provide that professional hub of computer science professionals that are all grouped under one ministry with a very focused mandate to support government operations. We have the Canadian Digital Service, which is the delivery arm or the delivery team for the Government of Canada. And we also have the Digital Academy, which has a mandate to train and upskill public servants in areas like cyber, data science, and digital literacy. So I'll pause there, given that we're out of time. Thanks.
I apologize for not being able to provide enough time for the answer. Thank you very much for being brief also with your answer. So thank you very much for explaining your IT agencies in Canada. And the last question will be given to all our panelists. In the interest of time, we would appreciate if you give short answers, but please do take enough time to share what your thoughts with us. So in the order of our seating, from the panelist who is farthest from me, this is my question to you. So we're engaging in all these efforts, but despite these efforts in the public sector, what is the biggest stumbling block, the biggest challenge in securing digital capacity in the public sector? Portugal, would you like to go first?
Well, a challenging question. Okay, so probably the obvious answer would be we lack financial resources, but it's not that one. I think we face three main difficulties. The first one is, and we go back to the first question, is talent. It's becoming more and more difficult to attract digital and ICT, high-skilled employees to the public sector because this area is very dynamic in the private sector. So although we try to use other arguments like the mission, the purpose, and the experience, it's a real challenge that we are facing. The second one, in our case, it's the public procurement for these more innovative technological acquisitions, which is a big challenge as well, because we understand that we have to be transparent and that has to be competition and the process has to be, let's say, complex in a way, but I think we lack more agile ways to do procurement in innovation and technology. And the third one, and now we go back to the new working group that Korea has proposed during these meetings, which is the governance. Because one of the big challenges, sometimes we know what to do, but the how is the biggest difficulty, and how can we coordinate all these programs across the government involving multiple agencies, both the universities, the private sector. So this governance is also one of the challenges that I would mention. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 캐나다 말씀.
Thank you very much. We'll listen to Canada next.
Well, in keeping with the topic of this panel and in the interest of identifying one challenge of many, I would say in having the bilaterals with my counterparts, many of us are grappling with the issue of a post-pandemic workplace and the desire to recruit from a national bench, the lack of talent or the lack of vocational talent in specific streams, and the desire to go across boundaries and to really find those talent hotbeds in hubs where there are startups or accelerators or folks that wouldn't generally want to live where government offices are housed, and how to balance that with the drive to bring people back to the office.
네, 자, 뉴질랜드 바로 말씀 들어보겠습니다.
Next, New Zealand, please.
Thank you. So many problems, so little time. Again, keeping with the context of this panel discussion, I think skills and talent. One of the things that we've realised is it's a demand and supply problem. So we've talked a lot about the things people are doing to try and grow supply. We think we've got to push down demand too, which might sound counterintuitive, but we're trying to do so much digital transformation all at once, and we need to better manage demand. So that might mean finding different ways to prioritise or sequence the different transformations of individual agencies, which they'll be resistant to, but we need to try, how they might collaborate and do it once amongst themselves as opposed to individually, or even how we might build a shared workforce or a workforce that moves between agencies. But we think demand management is a critical part of the labour supply problem too.
네, 짧게 잘 마무리해 주셔서 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much for your answer. Next, Korea, please.
First, our customers, citizens, are always very hard to satisfy. This recalls me the famous song, you know, the Never Enough, from The Greatest Showman. Citizens are hoping to receive just one click easier than private platform services. That's a big challenge. And the second one is the technical challenges. We are living with a very rapid technology changing world, right? I'd like to highlight a four-letter word. It does not mean a bad word. It is ABCD. AI, big data, cloud computing, and digital platform government. You are getting older, and then so my hair, getting white. But technologies are changing very quickly. So, however, catching up with the ABC, the technologies and the educating and realizing is a really challenging job for us in the real field. Thank you very much.
네, 좋은 말씀 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much for your statements. And we really wish we could go on with this discussion, but again, we have to end here because of the time constraint. We apologize for that. With regards to digital capacity, we can continue on with our activities through the working groups and the projects as well. Thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you very much, moderator, Director Son, and our brilliant panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end. I hope you had an insightful time. It is very difficult to gather such esteemed experts in one place. The Ministry of Interior and Safety, as the government ministry in charge of digital governance and as a member of OECD leaders and digital nations, we are the only Asian country to be member of these two international organizations, so we take pride in that fact. However, we do understand that this brings us more responsibility to us, and we have much on our mind, a lot of concerns. So we are collaborating with OECD, UN, World Bank, and through collaboration with these international organizations, we will commit more strongly to the cause of the digital governance. And lastly, we will listen to Director General of the Digital Government Bureau, his closing remarks. I would like to invite Mr. Seo to the stage.
Good afternoon. I am Director General for Digital Government, Seo Bo-ram, at the Ministry of the Interior and Safety of Korea. First of all, we did have some glitches during our global forum this afternoon, so I would like to apologize for those. Particularly, the clock was causing us some problems. So some people, some presenters, had enjoyed some benefit. Some presenters were at a loss. Again, I apologize for that glitch. At this year's Global Forum, we were able to engage in discussions over diverse topics. So we had representatives from international organizations talk about the role of the digital nations in the international community. And in particular, what was noteworthy was the following. Well, after that presentation, we did, of course, have a discussion time, and there were some things that I jotted down because they were impressive. Of course, sharing our successes is important, but more than that, our failures, our challenges, the difficulties that we have overcome, those should also be shared with the international community, and that would benefit other countries in their exchanges with digital nations, or for countries who hope to learn much from digital nations. And another insight that we derived was that, some people said that it's good for us to engage in in-depth discussions among ourselves, first of all. During our steering committee yesterday and today, one word that I really heard a lot was colleague or peers. So we are all on this boat together. We are working for the common causes and common goals together because we are all colleagues. And so through these kinds of forums, we were able to share our experiences more. And of course, we have to ensure that we become a digital nations that do more of the sharing work also in the future. And in the second session, we listened to examples of the Korea's mobile ID projects. And in particular, there was a focus on talent management, recruiting talents into the public sector. So we looked at how to enhance the digital capacity of all of the public servants, and also how we can bring in outside experts to use their capacity within the government. So that was a very good discussion that we had. As I mentioned at the outset, time management is very important. So every time there's a conference like this or an event like this, what's best is to end on time. But of course, it would be better if we could finish a little bit early. But now I see that the clock is at 4:55, which is a few minutes before our ending time. I'd like to thank Secretary Mario Campolargo as well as other VIPs who have been with us during the forum, representatives from UN, OECD, and the World Bank. Thank you. And I'm sure that you do have some time remaining in Korea, so please enjoy your visit and your schedule here. And again, we apologize because we were not able to provide a better forum to you, better summit to you because of our circumstances. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Director General Seoul-Rang. I understand that some of our delegates are flying out tomorrow. I hope you had a pleasant stay in Korea. From 6 p.m., we will be hosting dinner, and after dinner, there's a night tour around Palace Gyeongbokgung, so I do recommend that you take a look around the traditional Palace Gyeongbokgung, which is located at the heart of Seoul, under the moonlight, and enjoy that unique ambience and composure of a traditional palace. I hope you have a pleasant evening, and it was the event presented by Ministry of Interior and Safety. Thank you very much.